What's up guys, PixarDonks here bringing you another POE2 build video. Today we'll be focusing on the Mercenary class, specifically the Witchunter Mercenary. This lightning damage powered build will not only clear your entire screen with devastating shotgun blasts, but will also absolutely chunk bosses with crazy railgun power, all while remaining relatively safe in doing so. This build will be focused on the early endgame, and I'll have an update once I reach the later stages of the game with tier 15 plus maps and pinnacle bosses. A Mobalytics link will also be included in the description. Let's dive into it. Let's start with our skill gems. One of the keys to this build is that there are no grenade focused skill gems, meaning all of our damage comes from the crossbow projectiles themselves. Our first and most used skill gem is called Galvanic Shards. This skill fires a series of shotgun-esque blasts in a cone in front of you, with the bolts chaining between any enemy you hit. This skill also converts 40% of our physical damage to lightning damage, allowing us to shock and eventually electrocute our enemies. This is the main skill that we use when clearing mobs. Our next skill gem is called Shock Burst Rounds. This skill fires a stream of charged projectiles at the target, converting 40% of physical damage to lightning damage. The key to this skill is that the charged projectiles release pulses of damage when they hit an enemy affected with shock or electrocute, converting 100% of physical damage to lightning damage and massively boosting our DPS. This skill is almost useless without a lightning ailment affecting the target, so make sure to always apply shock or electrocute before use. This is the main skill that we use for finishing off rares or bosses. Our next skill gem is called Plasma Blast. This skill fires a piercing railgun-esque shot in a straight line towards the target, converting 70% of physical damage to lightning damage. This skill also inflicts a massive amount of electrocute as well as shock, with the skill itself having a 30% increased shock chance. This is the main skill that we use to chunk rares or bosses before going in for the kill with Shock Burst Rounds. Our next skill gem is called Emergency Reload. This skill, when activated, immediately reloads your crossbow with the last used ammunition, while also providing a 6-second buff that adds 22% damage to your next clip. This skill is used when fighting exceptionally tanky rares or bosses, as it allows us to instantly reload shock burst rounds with empowered damage should the enemies survive the initial burst. Our final skill gem is called Voltaic Mark. This skill marks an enemy for 8 seconds, with any hits against the marked enemy during this time frame gaining a 50% increased chance to shock. This shock also gains 30% increased effectiveness, increasing the value of the debuff against the marked enemy. This skill is used before engaging a boss or rare with Plasma Blast, all but guaranteeing the target to be shocked in order to be finished off with Shock Burst Rounds. Let's move on to our spirit gems. There are plenty of combinations of auras out there that can be used, but I decided to focus on one offensive, one defensive, and one utility to maintain a healthy balance of damage and survivability. Our first spirit gem is called Herald of Thunder. This aura makes it so any shocked enemy we kill empowers our next few attacks to release damaging AoE lightning bolts. 100% of this bolt's physical damage is converted to lightning damage, although the skill itself cannot apply shock. This aura is triggered by Galvanic Shards quite often and significantly improves our mob clearing capabilities. Our next spirit gem is called Wind Dancer. This aura grants us a stage every couple of seconds with a maximum of 3 stages. Each stage provides a small bump to our evasion stat until we are hit by an enemy, at which point all enemies are knocked back and take a small amount of damage. We will be stacking evasion in this build, and Wind Dancer increases our evasion rating even further. Our final spirit gem is Blink. Blink replaces our dodge roll with a 5-meter teleport on a short cooldown. This spirit gem is not necessary and is all about quality of life, as it will allow us to traverse the map much more quickly as well as reposition as needed. Let's move on to our support gems. For Galvanic Shards, we slot in Fort, creating an even larger shotgun blast cone that will assist us in clearing more mobs per shot. We also slot in Conduction in order to increase our chance to shock targets, allowing us to trigger Herald of Thunder more often. Finally, we slot in Martial Tempo for 25% increased attack speed, as well as Primal Armament for 25% increased elemental damage, both of which help boost our DPS. For Shock Burst Rounds, we slot in Heft for increased maximum physical damage as well as Elemental Focus in order to add 25% increased elemental damage at the cost of being unable to inflict electrocute or shock. We also slot in Concentrated Effect for even more single target damage at the cost of AoE damage, as well as Fresh Clip, increasing our damage every time we reload. For Plasma Blast, we first slot in Scattershot, allowing us to fire 3 consecutive Plasma Blasts instead of just 1, at the cost of slightly less damage per shot. We also slot in Lasting Shock in order to give us a greater uptime on the maximum DPS potential of Shock Burst rounds, which combines nicely with Overcharge, increasing the magnitude of the shock we inflict. Finally, we slot in Hourglass, granting us a massive 40% increase to damage at the cost of putting the skill on a 10-second cooldown. For Emergency Reload, we first slot in Premeditation, further increasing our damage by 15%, as well as Persistence, in order to make the buff last 40% longer. For Voltaic Mark, we simply slot in Execrate, giving the skill a 50% increased chance to inflict shock at the cost of putting it on an 8-second cooldown, as well as Inspiration, decreasing the mana cost by 40%. For Herald of Thunder, we first slot in Innervate, giving us a 35% increase to lightning damage whenever the triggered lightning bolts kill a shocked enemy. We also slot in Magnified Effect for increased AoE on our bolts. For Wind Dancer, we slot in Clarity, increasing our mana regeneration, as well as Unbreakable, increasing our stun threshold. Both of these support gems should be constantly procced, as Wind Dancer is almost always active until we get hit. Finally, for Blink, we have Ingenuity, so that we can use the skill 30% more often. I'm currently sitting at level 80 with 8 Ascendancy points, so I have a few more things I would like to add to the skill tree once I level up. But for now, I want to highlight a few clusters that I feel are extremely important for the build. Starting with our Ascendancy, I first decided to go for Pitiless Killer, granting us a Culling Execute on our attacks, as well as Judge, Jury, and Executioner, granting us a large burst of damage when attacking full health targets, particularly useful during boss fights. I also went with Obsessive Rituals, cutting our evasion and armor by 50%, but granting us the Sorcery Ward skill. This skill grants us a shield equal to 30% of our armor and evasion rating, blocking all elemental damage until depleted. Using this skill requires you to have a very high evasion or armor rating, which we will discuss in the gear section. Finally, I went with Zealous Inquisition, giving us a 10% chance for any enemy we kill to blow up, further improving our mob clear potential. Moving into the actual tree, we first path over to Remorseless, increasing our projectile damage as well as stun buildup. From here, we take Blur as well as Escape Velocity for increased evasion and movement speed. Moving down, we grab Catalysis for increased elemental damage as well as Exploit for increased damage to enemies we shock and a longer duration to our shocks. We also grab Emboldened Avatar for increased shock chance and Forces of Nature for some increased elemental penetration. Sand in the Eyes increases our attack speed, and Reusable Ammunition makes it so our attacks have a 15% chance not to consume a bolt. Moving up, we have Bestial Skin, increasing the effective evasion rating on our body armor, as well as Enhanced Reflexes, increasing our evasion and dexterity. This is important because Falcon Technique grants us 1% attack speed per 15 dexterity, meaning more dexterity equals more DPS. The rest of the nodes are largely up to personal preference, but feel free to copy my exact tree from the Mobalytics link in the description. For our jewel sockets, you should try and grab green jewels, as these grant bonuses such as increased lightning damage, increased crossbow attack speed, as well as increased crossbow damage. Our gear is still a work in progress and will be linked in the Mobalytics, but here are a few uniques you can try out in the build. The first option for this build is called Kitoko's Current Jeweled Gloves. These gloves are very cheap and you should be able to pick yourself up a pair for just a few exalted orbs. These gloves, at the cost of reduced attack speed, cause lightning damage from our hits to contribute towards electrocution buildup. This is an extremely powerful ability, allowing us to electrocute large packs of mobs at a time, while also priming rares for huge burst damage with shock burst rounds. While these gloves are not necessary for the build to function, the added utility they provide is a huge quality of life upgrade. The second option for this build are the Hands of Wisdom in Action. These gloves increase our attack speed based on dexterity and add lightning damage based on our intelligence. While this option massively increases our damage, it also makes us a bit more unsafe due to the lack of electrocution buildup. These gloves are also pretty expensive and are not at all necessary for the build to function. I have also been experimenting with the Death Rush Emerald Ring. This ring not only boosts our evasion and accuracy rating, passive bonuses that are always appreciated, but also grants us 5% life leech, increasing our survivability. The cherry on top is giving us the onslaught buff for 4 seconds after a kill, increasing our attack speed by 20% and movement speed by 10%, increasing our DPS and allowing for some added mobility. This ring is completely optional and might even hurt the build, but I am still in the process of experimenting. Finally, we have the Levinstone Topaz Ring. This ring grants us a level to all lightning skills, increasing our damage as well as adding an increased chance to shock. I have been liking this ring more and more each day I use it, and I definitely notice the increased shock chance, particularly against rares. None of these uniques are necessary for the build to function, just my personal recommendations. Our playstyle when clearing mobs is quite simple. We simply blast galvanic shards at the closest target and let Herald of Thunder clear the entire screen. When facing a rare, make sure it is shocked with galvanic shards before bursting it down with shock burst rounds. Finally, when it is possible, try and enter a boss fight with Plasma Blast already charged. That way you can instantly fire the second the boss spawns in, chunking it massively before finishing it off with shock burst rounds. I hope you guys enjoyed my POE2 Witchunter Mercenary build video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming build videos in the future. A Mobalytics link to the build will be included in the description. Until next time, Pixar Donks has left the building.